Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Desperate after being fired, the surgeon threw some money to the fortune teller, and she whispered, "Go back to the rich woman, examine her." He froze, as if recalling a terrifying detail from the surgery. "You're fired" sounded like thunder out of a clear sky, but in the office of the chief physician, there was no thunder, no lightning, no dramatic music, only the concerned face of Arturo Corona, director of a major medical center, and an indifferent, bureaucratic phrase, delivered as part of the clinical routine of a large hospital. But for 30-year-old surgeon Diego Serrano, those words felt like a sentence. "You have 5 minutes to vacate the department," Arturo repeated quietly, lowering his voice as if afraid of his own words. Diego could barely keep hold of the medical folder in his hands. Stripped of his position, he stood trying to maintain the last remnants of dignity. Inside, he was boiling with a storm of injustice. Hurt, guilt, despair, it all knotted together into a mass that seemed impossible to untangle. 5 minutes, Arturo repeated, then added more gently, "Diego, believe me, this isn't my decision. My hands are tied too. Yesterday's incident, the doctors, the board, you understand." Diego did understand, but he couldn't accept it. The previous day, an incident had occurred that spawned rumors and speculation so quickly that his reputation crumbled in mere hours. Allegedly, he had entered the operating room drunk and harmed a patient. But that wasn't the truth. He had indeed returned to the hospital late that night because a nurse had called, asking him to check on a post-op patient. The patient, a wealthy businesswoman, was experiencing complications, and Diego rushed in. But somehow, after his visit, discrepancies appeared in the medical reports. Whispers began that he had broken protocol, that he might have taken something. The rumors quickly reached the administration. In the end, he was accused of negligence and fired. Diego had tried to defend himself, but when the entire system turns against you, there's too much to prove. And one by one, the pieces of evidence began to disappear. Even the very patient, famous for her influence and combative personality, didn't stand up for him, despite the fact he'd practically saved her life with timely surgery. He left the office in silence, clutching the thin folder with his last documents. His colleagues in the corridor immediately looked away. Some tried to nod sympathetically, but most just hurried past, as if afraid of catching his misfortune. Minutes later, Diego stood outside the hospital, feeling an overwhelming emptiness rise in his chest. He had lost everything, or almost everything. 8 years of study, 6 in university, 2 in residency. Then more years of practice, constant learning, certifications, international internships, sleepless nights on call. All of it, gone in an instant. "Damn it," he whispered, covering his head with his hands. The world swam before his eyes. He saw passers-by, bright ads for pharmaceutical companies flashing on the screen near the entrance, heard the hiss of tires from passing cars. None of it made sense anymore. Suddenly, a figure approached, a short girl in a bright skirt, her wrists jingling with colorful bracelets. Her name was Sarah. A young Romani woman who often lingered near the hospital, offering palm readings, tarot, whatever she could. Diego had seen her many times but never paid attention. Now, in his despair, she seemed like something to cling to. "Doctor, want a reading?" Sarah asked softly, coming close. "I see trouble in your eyes. Cross my palm with silver, I'll tell you how to lift it." Diego flared with frustration. Another scam flashed through his mind, but his desperation made him dig into his pockets, pull out a few bills, and throw them into her palm. "Here. Look. Say whatever you want," he said, trying to sound detached, though pain flickered in his eyes. "I don't care anymore." Sarah looked down at the money and gave a faint smile, not mocking, but sad. She took his hand as if reading the lines on his palm, then frowned, clearly lost in thought. "Listen, doctor," she whispered, rising on her toes to reach his ear, "go back to the rich woman. Examine her." He frowned. "Go back to the rich woman," she repeated. "You think her story's over, but I see something different. You must return to the one who holds sway over your fate. Examine her." Figure out what really happened. Your truth is there. Diego froze, as if struck by lightning. Her words hit the rawest nerve in his mind. The only rich woman linked to a scandal in his career was that very same powerful patient he had recently operated on. That surgery had marked the beginning of his professional downfall. "What do you know about this?" he demanded, pulling his hand free. Sarah said nothing, just lowered her eyes. Maybe she was a seer who sensed something in his gaze. Or maybe she overheard the gossip. Everyone at the hospital had been talking about the Diego scandal and that particular patient. She merely added softly, "Maybe it's a trick. But if you want the truth, follow your heart. And be brave." Then she stepped back and slipped into the crowd, disappearing around the corner of the hospital. Diego stood alone, still feeling the tremble in his hand. Go back to the rich woman. Examine her. The word spun in his mind. He seemed to recall some terrible detail from the operation, something he had tried to forget. His reason told him the fortune teller's words were just coincidence, but his intuition screamed otherwise. He remembered how that patient, Vera Valenzuela, had been rushed to the clinic with abdominal pain. It was acute cholecystitis, but further diagnostics revealed other issues. The surgery had been difficult and dangerous. He had done everything right. She recovered. Then came the rumors. Diego nearly ran down the hospital steps, as if defying the place that had cast him out. His pockets were nearly empty, just his house keys and some loose change. Go back to the rich woman. It echoed in his head. But how? And more importantly, why? Her security certainly wouldn't welcome him, and she herself had clearly turned her back on him. He walked aimlessly down the street, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. The realization hit: he had no job, no references, and no hope of finding work at a reputable hospital anytime soon. He had no family in the city. His parents had long lived abroad. He was estranged from his father, and his mother couldn't offer emotional or financial support. Besides, Diego had always prided himself on independence. But now, pride was useless. He ducked into the first bar he saw. It was dim and noisy. He didn't want alcohol, but his mind needed a break from thoughts of the future. He ordered juice and took a seat in the back. He thought about calling a colleague, but most of them had cowardly distanced themselves. Maybe Marina? His ex? No, it had been 6 months since their breakup, and they weren't in touch. Instead, he pulled out his phone, opened his messaging apps, dozens of messages about the firing, gossip being passed around. The hospital group chats were buzzing. He'd already been removed from them, probably to prevent him from seeing internal discussions. Only one message stood out. Stay strong, Diego. I know you're not guilty. I'll fight for you. It was from Xenia, a nurse from his department. The message warmed something inside him. At least someone believed in him. But even if Xenia supported him, what now? The order had come from the top. It was final. He reached for his phone to reply, when suddenly he saw Sarah, the fortune teller, enter the bar. How did she find him? Or had he just caught her eye as an easy target? Sarah noticed him and walked over, her colorful skirt flowing. She sat down across from him without asking. People in the bar stared, but she didn't care. Sorry for finding you again, she said quietly, lowering her eyes. I saw you running from the hospital steps. I went inside after that, offering to read palms, and everyone's talking about you. About me? Diego looked at her warily. Yes, document. Some say you're guilty, some say you're not. But everyone's arguing about a strange story involving a surgery. I remembered that rich lady. I saw her being brought in. They said her name was Vera Valenzuela. Diego nodded silently, torn inside. It was uncomfortable, having this stranger speak about it, and in a bar, right after his dismissal. And then, when I saw you in despair, she paused, choosing her words, I felt like I had to tell you the truth. I'm not a psychic, doctor. I just heard things. And I think that woman has a reason to keep you afraid. Maybe she doesn't even realize the danger she's in. But you have to go back. Go back and beg for forgiveness." Diego smirked bitterly. She didn't even hide her dislike for me these past days. She could have saved my career by telling the truth that I was sober that night and came at the nurse's request. But she stayed silent. Or worse, confirmed the lie that I broke protocol. Maybe she didn't know her words would destroy you? Or maybe someone paid her to stay silent. Someone benefits from you losing your job. Diego gave a crooked smile. Normally, he didn't believe in conspiracy theories, but the way things had played out truly was strange. Contracts with pharmaceutical companies, competition among doctors, it wasn't unheard of for people to play dirty to secure a spot in a top clinic. "Maybe you're right," he said, slightly relaxing, "but right now I've got no money, no connections. I can't just show up at Vera's house demanding answers. She's got security, and she's not exactly an easy person to deal with." Sarah smiled mysteriously, then said quietly, "Rich people are sometimes lonely. Sometimes they long for genuine human connection. Maybe she would be glad to talk to you. But everyone around her is telling her you're the enemy." At that moment, loud music began to play in the bar. Sarah leaned in closer to Diego so he could hear her over the noise. "I know people who might help me find out where she lives. I've heard she has a large estate outside the city, far from prying eyes. They took her there after she was discharged from the hospital. People say she still hasn't fully recovered." Diego paused, thinking. The circumstances were strange. If Vera still wasn't well, maybe something had gone wrong after the surgery. But then, why hadn't they called a doctor? Why hadn't they called him? That raised a serious question. Or had someone else taken over her care? Maybe this whole thing was part of some scheme. "Listen, Sarah," Diego said, lowering his voice. "I don't know what you're after. But if you really have any information about Vera, if you can actually help me understand what happened, I'll pay you, but I don't have much right now." Sarah waved her hand. "No need for money, doctor. Those few bills helped me, yes, but I saw your pain, and I felt for you. I'm not as bad as people think. I just make a living how I can. And now your story. I got pulled into it by accident." Diego looked at her with curiosity. Her eyes sparkled with a strange blend of resolve and kindness. "Maybe not everything in life came down to deceit. I think we can help each other," she added. "You'll learn the truth. If it helps clear your name, you'll get your career back. And me, maybe someday I'll meet a real doctor I can trust." Diego gave a short nod. He could sense in this girl a sharp instinct, boldness, and a certain sensitivity to people. That settled it between them. They left the bar together, and she told him that people in her Tabor, Romani camp sometimes worked small events for the wealthy, fortune-telling, dancing, evening shows at private villas. That's how she'd learned where Vera Valenzuela might live. "Wait, so you've been to her house?" Diego asked in surprise. "Not exactly. I danced at a private party next door. That's when they were talking about her. People in that neighborhood love bragging about their connections." Diego stood near the bar's exit, wondering if he was losing his mind. He was about to follow the lead of a fortune teller he'd only met an hour ago. He had no idea where this might take him. But there was no alternative. Official channels were closed to him. His colleagues had turned their backs. And Sarah's words still echoed in his mind, "Go back to the rich woman. Examine her." "All right," he finally said. "What should I do? I don't have her exact address yet. But I'll find out. It'll take a day or two. I'll let you know." "And what am I supposed to do in the meantime?" Diego asked bitterly. "Visit an old friend. Maybe stay with someone. I understand you have nowhere to go right now." He sighed. The apartment he was renting was close to the clinic, and in a month he'd be evicted. The lease had been arranged through the hospital, and he didn't have much money left in his account. He needed a backup plan. Fine, he agreed. I have a friend, Alejandro. He's a lawyer. Maybe I can crash at his place for a few days. Perfect. Then I'll find you, she smiled warmly, unexpectedly even to herself. Don't disappear. They exchanged phone numbers. Sarah walked off her own way. Diego stayed behind, still trying to process what had just happened. His mind raced. How did I end up here, taking help from a street fortune teller? But no answer came. That evening, he called his friend Alejandro Gomez. Alejandro was a few years older. They'd met when Diego had performed emergency surgery on one of Alejandro's relatives. They'd stayed in touch ever since. Alejandro was a kind man with a sharp legal mind. Diego, are you drunk? Alejandro asked when he heard his friend's broken voice. No, I was just fired. What? Alejandro raised his voice in shock. How? You're one of the most talented surgeons in the city. Look, this isn't something we talk about over the phone. Come over. Within 40 minutes, Diego was sitting in Alejandro's spacious, modern apartment. Alejandro set out tea and sandwiches. No ceremony, just a friend helping a friend. Tell me everything, Alejandro said, arms crossed like in his law office. Diego recounted everything, the operation on Vera Valenzuela, the complications, the nighttime call, the sudden accusations, the firing. Alejandro listened carefully, asking questions here and there. Sounds like a setup. Do you have any documents? Patient records? Reports? Security footage? Diego spread his hands. Everything's at the clinic. I have a few copies, but not everything. The security footage doesn't show anything useful, just me entering the building at night. And yes, I look like I'm swaying. But I hadn't slept in over 24 hours, I was just exhausted. So it looks like you weren't sober? Exactly. But I wasn't drunk. I didn't take anything. Then we need witnesses. Someone who can confirm you were sober. Nurse Xenia called me that night. She asked me to come in. But for some reason, her testimony wasn't considered in the internal hearing. Alejandro tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. A private clinic. They probably have their own people in key places. Yeah. It's not simple. But I'll try to help. Thank you, Alejandro, Diego said sincerely. Actually, I have a favor to ask. Can I stay here for a couple of days until I figure something out? Of course. Stay as long as you need. I promise it won't be long. I need to look into something. If it works out, I'll either get back to work or... Look into what? Alejandro asked, wary. Diego hesitated. He didn't want to mention Sarah or his plan to see the rich woman again. He didn't want to sound like an idiot. So he simply said, I want to meet with Valenzuela. See what she has to say. But I don't know how yet. Want me to try reaching out through official channels? No, Diego suddenly blurted. I mean, I don't want to pressure her. If I show up with a lawyer, she'll shut down immediately. Alejandro shrugged. Your call. But be warned, she's powerful. If you show up uninvited, it could backfire. I know. But I don't see another way. Alejandro sighed and patted him on the shoulder. All right. Stay the night. In the morning, we'll think it through again. The next morning, Diego got up and tried to pull himself together. He realized he didn't even have proper clothes anymore. He was used to wearing scrubs or formal suits. Now it all seemed out of place. He opened his suitcase, hastily packed the day before, just a couple of shirts, jeans, old sneakers. He picked something at least clean and neat. Looking in the mirror, he saw a tired man with messy hair and dark circles under his eyes. Hard to believe he was once the pride of the clinic. I need to pull myself together, Diego told himself, trying to lift his spirits. During breakfast, Alejandro suggested he meet with a contact of his who worked at an insurance company just to see if there were any documents related to the Valenzuela case. Diego agreed, knowing deep down that any piece of information could help. They scheduled the meeting for midday. Alejandro left to take care of some legal work, and Diego stayed behind, waiting for Sarah to call. But time passed, and she didn't. He began to worry she had simply disappeared, and that her help had been nothing more than an illusion. At noon, Diego went to the insurance company's office, where Alejandro's acquaintance, Dennis, suggested they speak in the smoking area to avoid drawing attention. Dennis was a tall man of about 35, with a sharp gaze and a talent for expressing himself quickly and precisely. "The Valenzuela case? Yeah, I remember. She has premium-level insurance. What exactly do you need?" Diego tried to explain the situation carefully, avoiding the more sensitive details of his dismissal. Dennis listened and nodded. "You see, Valenzuela insured her health for a hefty sum. And since she had surgery, we were expecting a claim from the clinic. Part of it has already been paid, because she spent several days hospitalized. But as for the complications..." "What about the complications?" Diego tensed. "We don't have a final report. The clinic sent an initial request, we began processing it, but then everything stalled." "Why?" "No idea. Either Valenzuela withdrew the claim or the clinic suspended the process. In the end, no compensation for the complications was paid. It's strange. Normally, the patient either gets compensated or, if the doctor is found at fault, the claim is denied. But here, nothing." Diego rubbed his chin, deep in thought. If she did have complications, she could have claimed the money. But maybe the clinic, blaming the surgeon, didn't want to pay out. Or maybe Valenzuela herself put the process on hold to avoid a scandal. "So, you have no new documents at all?" Diego clarified. "No. Just what we got during her hospitalization. We don't even know what tests were done post-op or what the results were." Diego sighed heavily. It seemed he had no leads from the insurance side. He thanked Dennis and left empty-handed. As he exited the building, his phone suddenly rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Hoping it was Sarah, Diego answered quickly. "Hello?" "It's me," came a quiet female voice. It was indeed Sarah. "I found out where your rich lady lives." Diego glanced around the street, as if afraid someone might be listening. "I'm listening. Go on." "The gated community is called Las Piñas, house number 17. About 20 kilometers from the city. They say she moved there right after leaving the clinic." "Got it. Are you sure it's the right address?" "Yes." "What are you going to do?" He hesitated for a moment. A decision had to be made. "I guess I'll go there. But how do I get in? Is the community guarded?" "Yes, there's a security checkpoint, a pass system. But I asked my cousin, he's been there several times for performances. You can enter as service staff if you have a pass or if they're expecting you." "And if they're not expecting me?" "Well, there's a back entrance through the woods. The fence is low there. People say it's possible to sneak in." Diego closed his eyes, trying to imagine himself, yesterday a respected surgeon, now sneaking into a private estate through the woods like a criminal. The situation felt both absurd and terrifying. "Sarah," he said, trying to speak as calmly as possible, "can you come with me? I'm scared to go alone." "I thought you wouldn't want to be seen with a gypsy," she said with a sad smile in her voice. "I don't care what people think. What matters is finding the truth." Sarah was silent for a moment. Then she made up her mind. "All right, doctor. I'll help you. I can try talking to the guards at the entrance. I've had contacts there before. We've performed in that area more than once. We'll say we were invited. And we'll see what happens." They agreed to meet in the evening at the bus station to head toward the community together. Diego hung up, feeling a mixture of fear and determination rise in his chest. Why am I doing this? He asked himself. The answer was simple: to find out what had derailed his life. And more importantly, to figure out if Vera herself was in danger. He returned to Alejandro's apartment, but Alejandro wasn't home yet. Diego packed a few things into a backpack, changed into more practical clothes, sneakers, a light jacket, and left a note. Gone to take care of something important. I'll be back late. Don't worry. At the bus station, Diego spotted Sarah sitting on a bench with a small bundle in her lap. She was wearing the same bright skirt and bracelets, but now had a dark sweater over them to be less conspicuous. Ready? He asked as he approached. Let's go, she nodded. There's a bus that goes near Las Piñas. After that, we either walk or get lucky and hitch a ride. For the first time, Diego felt like life had thrown him into some strange adventure, but he couldn't turn back now. They boarded the bus. Along the way, Sarah opened up a bit more. I'm from Andalusia. My Tabor used to travel between cities. I was born on the road. My mom lost my grandmother early. And my father, he made money with cards, theft. Not a good life. I wanted something different. I went to school, learned to read and write, but didn't finish. My family moved on. How old are you? Diego asked, studying her delicate features. 23. I know I look younger. You don't just live off fortune-telling, do you? No. Sometimes I dance at weddings, sometimes I help organize parties. I survive however I can. He nodded, trying to understand her life. She seemed vulnerable, but also carried a surprising inner strength. Do you have family? She suddenly asked. My mother raised me. My father left when I was 10. We're not on bad terms, we just haven't spoken in years. My mother moved to another city. I visit her sometimes. But now, I don't even know how to tell her about the dismissal. Sarah nodded understandingly. It's hard when there's no one to lean on. But I believe things will turn out all right. Their conversation was cut short by a sudden stop. The bus driver shouted about a traffic jam ahead. Diego and Sarah got off, realizing it would be faster to walk the last few kilometers than sit in a stifling bus. They headed along the forest strip, navigating by the map on Diego's phone. The road was dusty, cars speeding past them. Half an hour later, they reached the turn to Las Piñas. A sign loomed ahead, and beyond it a paved road led to a gate. Evening was falling. The sun dipped toward the horizon, but there was still light. 2 guards in dark uniforms stood at the checkpoint. Beyond the gate were clean paths, trimmed lawns, and large houses in the distance. Sarah stepped aside to make a call. Diego waited nervously nearby. After a few minutes, she returned. Unfortunately, my contact isn't on shift. The other guards don't know me. We could try telling them we were invited to House 17 to perform, but they probably have a guest list. So they won't let us in, Diego muttered. We'll have to go through the woods, then. Yeah. I know a spot where the fence is lower. They walked along the outer perimeter of the estate. The fence was high, but after some time they reached a place where the hill rose nearly to the top of the barrier. Apparently, the builders hadn't accounted for the elevation difference. It would be easier to climb there. Careful, Sarah warned as she began climbing the slope. Diego offered her his hand and then followed, grabbing onto a branch. After a few minutes of clumsy scrambling, they found themselves on the other side of the fence, now standing inside the gated community. In front of them stretched a narrow path, surrounded by pine trees and neatly trimmed bushes. In the distance, silhouettes of large houses emerged. Feels like something out of a Hollywood movie, Diego muttered, trying to stay out of sight. As they moved past a property that, according to the sign on the gate, belonged to the Lobos family, they reached the internal road of the compound. An occasional car passed, and a few people walked their dogs, but dusk was falling, and no one paid them much attention, likely mistaking them for gardeners or domestic staff. Look, Sarah whispered, pointing to a post. There are the plot numbers. We're looking for number 17. They walked along the street, reading the signs, 10, 11, 12. They turned onto another street, 15, 16, and finally, 17. Behind a tall fence stood a classic-style house with columns, a long driveway, and lampposts lining the path. Well then, Diego murmured, nervously swallowing. Time to act. They approached. The gate had an intercom system, and a surveillance camera loomed above. Inside the grounds, the lawn was immaculately trimmed, and a black SUV sat parked on the side. The house looked quiet, only a few windows were lit, as were the lanterns by the gate. What now? Diego asked. Do I just ring the bell and say, "Hi, I'm the fired surgeon. Can I see Ms. Valenzuela?" That sounds ridiculous. Sarah frowned, thought for a moment, then whispered. Maybe we should check around the back first? There might be a service entrance or something. They moved along the fence quietly. Circling the house, they noticed a small gate leading into a garden. Next to it stood a trash bin and a path clearly meant for service use. The gate was locked, but the lock didn't look particularly secure. We need a key or some kind of pick, Diego noted. Leave it to me, Sarah grinned. She pulled a small set of lockpicks from her purse, which surprised Diego immensely. Are you a thief? He whispered in alarm. Relax. Long story. I just know how to open simple locks. In a couple of minutes, the lock clicked softly. The gate gave way. Diego suppressed the surge of adrenaline. God, what have I gotten myself into, he thought, but it was too late to back out. They slipped into the garden. It was dark here, dense with leafy trees. Somewhere nearby, a small fountain trickled quietly. That window's lit, Sarah whispered, pointing to the house's side wing. Diego crept closer. The window was shut, but through the thin curtain he could make out a luxuriously furnished living room. No one in sight, just the lights on. To the side, there was another door, possibly leading to a bedroom or office. No one's here, he whispered. Let's keep going. They rounded the corner and saw a glass door leading into a spacious living room. The glass was semi-transparent. Through it, they could make out part of the room, a sofa, a TV, a fireplace. The lighting was dim. A woman was lying on the sofa, and silence filled the room. Is that her? Sarah asked barely audibly. Diego peered closer. The light was low, but yes, the figure looked a lot like Vera Valenzuela, chestnut hair, thin face. She was lying wrapped in a blanket, eyes closed. Looks like it, Diego confirmed. Sarah tugged on his sleeve. Look, the door doesn't seem locked from the inside. I only see one latch, Diego replied. He gently pressed the handle. The door gave slightly. From inside came faint sounds, either someone stirring or softly playing television. Diego cautiously pushed the door open. His legs trembled with tension, and his heart was pounding so hard it felt deafening. Who's there? A deep male voice suddenly rang out from the hallway. Sarah and Diego froze. They were just on the threshold of the living room, and in the semi-darkness, their faces were hard to see. From around the corner stepped a large man with a close-cropped haircut. He wore a t-shirt and trousers, likely a bodyguard. In his hand was something, maybe a phone, maybe a weapon. Who are you? He repeated, stepping toward them. Sarah instantly realized she needed to improvise. Relax, good sir. It's just us, performers. We were invited for a birthday, she said with her trademark smile. Birthday, the guard said suspiciously, not yet having seen Diego's face clearly. There's no birthday today. Step into the light. They stepped forward out of the shadows. The guard frowned even more upon seeing their unfamiliar faces. Footsteps approached from behind, and suddenly a woman appeared in the doorway, about 40, dressed in a strict suit. Likely the housekeeper or manager. What's going on? She asked. Who are these people? At that moment, Vera, who had been lying on the sofa, stirred and propped herself up on one elbow. What's the noise? Salvador, what's happening? Intruders. Unknown individuals in the house, the guard reported briskly, though his voice betrayed a hint of confusion. Upon hearing this, Vera turned her head toward the door, and the light from a nearby lamp fell on Diego's face. She squinted, studied him carefully, and her eyes widened. Diego? What are you doing here? Her voice was full of confusion and dismay. The guard looked back and forth between Vera and Diego in surprise. You know him, ma'am? Vera slowly nodded, still unable to believe her eyes. Yes, I know him. He's my doctor, or rather, he was. But why are you here? Diego felt his mouth go dry. He hadn't expected her to recognize him so quickly, nor had he imagined the situation playing out like this, surrounded by a guard and a housekeeper. Vera, I need to talk to you, he said firmly, trying to sound confident. It's about your surgery. About your condition. Vera winced, as if in pain, and lowered her gaze. The guard remained tense, ready to throw Diego and Sarah out at a moment's notice. But Vera, it seemed, still had some degree of trust, or at least curiosity. Salvador, she said to the guard, give us a few minutes. They'll stay. But ma'am, I said. And check that the perimeter is secure. Salvador stepped toward the door, but even as he left, he kept a close eye on Diego. The housekeeper, her stern expression unchanged, also gave them a sharp look before exiting. A tense silence fell over the living room. Can you explain why you're breaking into my house like a burglar? Vera asked Diego, now more sternly. Diego glanced briefly at Sarah, who stepped aside to let him speak. Please understand, I was fired, Diego began, trying to maintain his composure, and one of the reasons were the rumors that I mishandled your surgery. I came because I want to know the truth about what happened to you and? Vera prompted, shaking her head. I'm sorry you were fired, but I don't see how I can help. You could confirm that I was sober when I came to the clinic that night, that I didn't make any mistakes. For a moment, the woman pressed her lips together. Her gaze softened, but she was clearly unsettled. Diego, I honestly don't know what happened back then. Yes, you were with me that night, and the next morning they told me there might be complications. Then some people from management came, asking all sorts of questions. I was on sedatives and barely understood what was going on. So you didn't say I was intoxicated? No, she replied firmly. I said nothing of the sort. On the contrary, when the lawyers came, I told them I couldn't remember what you looked like or what condition you were in. Then they gave me some papers to sign. I thought it was standard paperwork. Maybe it said something else? Diego tensed. So you may have signed documents that slandered me? I don't know. There was a lot of legal jargon. I couldn't focus at the time. The doctor said they needed my signature for the report. Diego exhaled deeply. It seemed the clinic had taken advantage of her vulnerable state to cover themselves. How are you feeling now? He changed the subject, having noticed how pale and exhausted she looked. Vera rubbed her temples tiredly. Not well. I have strange pain near the incision. The doctor who came after I was discharged said it's post-surgical neuralgia. But it hasn't gone away. Did you have a fever? Were you given antibiotics? Yes, I had injections at first, but they stopped. The pain and some kind of weakness are still there. I get dizzy sometimes. Diego frowned, his professional instincts kicked in. You need a proper examination. Possibly an ultrasound, blood tests. I was advised to check into another clinic. But I'm afraid it'll turn into another scandal. And I've got business matters too. He shook his head. That kind of stubbornness could cost you your life, Vera. If there are complications and they go untreated, it could get serious. She lowered her eyes for a moment, and Diego saw her shoulders tremble. Maybe she truly was afraid, but pride wouldn't let her admit it openly. You want to examine me? She asked suddenly, with a slightly ironic smile. Yes, he replied seriously, if you'll allow it. Vera stood from the couch, swaying a bit. Diego instinctively jumped up to support her by the elbow and felt how weak she really was. Sarah stepped back respectfully, understanding it was a professional moment. They went into a nearby room, apparently an office. There was a couch and a small medical cabinet with basic supplies. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway, clearly displeased, but Vera gestured that everything was fine. The woman left, casting Diego a suspicious glance. The guard also tried to follow, but Vera ordered him to stay outside. I don't have proper equipment, Diego said, glancing around, but I can at least perform a basic exam. Vera nodded wearily and unzipped her sweater. Underneath, she wore light loungewear. She lay down on the couch, trying not to groan from the pain. Diego sat beside her, recalling all the techniques he had learned and practiced, this time without sterile gloves or standard tools. Gently feeling around the area near the surgical scar on her abdomen, he noticed localized warmth, a possible sign of inflammation. Vera flinched at his touch. Does that hurt? Yes, she whispered. How many days since the surgery? A little over a week. Normally by now you should be feeling better. If the pain persists, with localized heat and overall weakness, you need urgent blood work and an ultrasound. She bit her lip. Diego looked into her eyes and saw despair. She seemed afraid to trust him, but also understood he might be the only one who truly cared about her right now. All right, Vera finally said. Let's say I agree to tests and an exam. But how? Everyone thinks I'm your victim. They wouldn't understand why I let you in again. I don't care, Diego said harshly. What matters is your health. I can take you right now to a private lab. It's open 24/7. But then everyone will know we're together. Are you okay with that? Vera lowered her gaze, thinking. She clearly hesitated. Her reputation meant a lot to her. But if she didn't act, the complications could worsen. Fine, she finally said, lifting her chin with her trademark haughtiness, though her eyes betrayed confusion. I'll put on a coat, pretend I'm leaving on business. I'll tell the staff I'll be back tomorrow. You'll take me to the lab. Good. The sooner, the better, he said, realizing time could be critical. They returned to the living room. Sarah stood with her head lowered while the guard was quietly scolding her in a threatening tone. He fell silent when he saw Vera. Salvador, Vera said firmly. I'm going with Dr. Serrano for a checkup. You're in charge. Don't ask questions. This is my decision. Ma'am, it's not safe, Salvador objected, glaring at Diego. It's not up for discussion, she snapped. Salvador fell silent, though clearly furious. The housekeeper stepped in from the kitchen, hearing the voices, but didn't interfere. She seemed wary of Vera. I'll take the car, Vera added, then turned to Sarah. And who are you? The girl smiled slightly, making a small curtsy. Just the doctor's assistant. I knew he wanted to see you. Vera looked her up and down and said with disapproval. Fine, come with us so I don't have to leave you here. But understand, I don't need more scandals. Sarah said nothing, just lowered her eyes to avoid confrontation. Diego sensed the tension escalating and knew he had to stay focused. Let's get ready then, he commanded, knowing he'd once again have to step into his role as a doctor protecting his patient. Vera changed into different clothes and threw on a coat with a hood to stay inconspicuous. The three of them, Diego, Sarah, and Vera, got into the black SUV parked in front of the house. Before leaving, Vera turned to Salvador and said curtly, Stay quiet. If anything happens, I'm reachable. The guard nodded, but his eyes were full of distrust and anger toward Diego. Do you know the way? Diego asked, looking at Vera. Yes, she replied, getting behind the wheel. The lab is in the city center. I know the administrator. Good, Diego agreed, taking the passenger seat. Sarah settled in the back. The engine started, and they quietly left the driveway, passing the guardhouse. The guard raised his eyebrows at the unfamiliar faces but lifted the gate as soon as he recognized Vera at the wheel. By the time they reached the highway, it was already night. Only the streetlights lit the road. Vera drove quickly but steadily. Diego looked at her profile, remembering how she'd recently been on the operating table, and now she was driving, gripping the wheel with pale fingers. "Are you feeling dizzy?" he asked with concern. "A little," she admitted. "But I need to drive. It helps me not think about the pain." Diego understood it was risky, but it was too late to argue. He turned toward Sarah, who was sitting in the back, pressed against the seat. The girl looked tense, occasionally glancing out the window at the passing lights. "Well, you got to see how the rich live," Diego said half-jokingly, trying to lighten the mood a little. "Yeah, the house is beautiful," Sarah replied quietly, but the atmosphere felt cold. "Yes," Diego agreed curtly. In Vera's house, he had indeed felt a strange, detached coldness, as if there was no warmth or joy there. They pulled up to the lab and parked. Vera stepped out, slightly unsteady, but trying to maintain her composure. Sarah helped her close the car door, and Diego offered her his arm. "Should I call for a wheelchair?" he asked. "No," Vera replied stubbornly. "I can manage." In the reception area, they were greeted by the administrator, a young woman named Elena, who clearly knew Vera well. "Oh, Senora Valenzuela, hello," she said with a smile. "Is it urgent?" Vera nodded and gestured toward Diego. "This is Dr. Serrano. He will handle the examination. Please prepare everything needed for blood tests and an abdominal ultrasound." Elena glanced briefly at Diego, clearly trying to figure out who he was. Vera was usually accompanied by other doctors, but her tone remained respectful. Vera was clearly a VIP client. "Of course. The rooms are available. I'll get everything ready." They were shown to a small room with a couch, an ultrasound machine, and medical cabinets. Vera took off her coat and lay down with a sigh of pain. Diego asked Elena for ultrasound gel and disposable gloves. Thankfully, the lab was well equipped. Sarah stayed in the hallway to give them privacy. As Diego began the examination, Vera bit her lip to suppress the discomfort. On the ultrasound screen, Diego studied the tissue structures, looking for signs of inflammation, fluid buildup, or irregularities. As an experienced surgeon, he could interpret several key indicators. The image was troubling. Around the bile duct, he saw fluid, a possible abscess. "Just as I feared," Diego said quietly. "It looks like a post-surgical abscess. We need blood work, but most likely you'll need drainage." Vera stared at him in alarm. "What? Another operation?" "Minimally invasive, probably ultrasound-guided drainage, but it has to be done urgently. If the infection spreads, the consequences could be severe. I can't be hospitalized right now, I have." "Vera," Diego interrupted her in a firm tone, "you have to. Your condition could deteriorate rapidly. This is serious." She squeezed her eyes shut, clearly battling internally. Then, wearily, she said, "All right, but not in that hospital, the one owned by my competitors. I know a few places where we can do it quietly and professionally. We can arrange everything privately." "Fine," she nodded. "I'll trust you." At that moment, Diego felt something had shifted between them. Not long ago, they had been doctor and high-profile patient. Now, it felt like they were both castaways, trying to save each other. "We'll run the blood tests and assess how urgent the intervention is," Diego said, "but we need to act." Vera nodded and instructed Elena to take her blood for analysis. Then she asked Diego, "Can we do the drainage here, in this lab?" "Maybe, if they have the right equipment and a sterile room. But I think it's better to use a specialized facility. I know a colleague at a private clinic. He won't be afraid of a scandal." Vera sighed deeply. "All right. Do what you think is best." Elena returned with a syringe and a blood collection kit. Diego gave her a reassuring nod. Once the blood was drawn and she left the room, Diego gently helped Vera sit up and placed her coat over her shoulders. "What now?" she asked softly. "Let's go to the car. We'll discuss our next steps there," he suggested. "We need to plan how to proceed." They left the lab and met Sarah in the hallway. She looked worried, but seeing Vera on her feet calmed her slightly. They descended into the lobby. There, Vera stopped at the reception desk. "Elena, call me when the test results are ready. I'll come by or send someone. Let's say, tomorrow by noon." "Of course," Elena replied. The three of them stepped out into the cool, windy night. Vera shivered. Diego suggested, "Maybe we should go to my friend's apartment for now. It's quiet, and I can monitor your condition." Vera looked at him skeptically. "What? Stay at your friend's place? Just for one night? Tomorrow, when we get the results, we'll decide where to go for the procedure." She hesitated but suddenly coughed and clutched her abdomen, wincing in pain. Seeing this, Sarah gently said, "It's better not to return tonight to that big empty house without a doctor around." Vera understood that the fortune teller was right, even if her expression showed clear annoyance that Sarah was part of the conversation. "Fine, let's go," she said at last. "But make sure no one finds out where I am. I don't want journalists or competitors showing up." "I promise," Diego nodded. They got into the car. Vera took the wheel again, despite Diego's concern that she might get worse along the way. But she was stubborn. During the drive, they barely spoke. Vera asked only once or twice how much farther it was. By the time they reached Alejandro's apartment, it was past midnight. Diego asked her to park farther away so they wouldn't attract attention. "Let me go ahead," he said, realizing he needed to warn his friend about the late visit. Alejandro opened the door and was about to scold him. "Where have you been?" "I was worried." But then he saw who was behind Diego, a glamorously dressed woman looking unwell, and a young Romani woman in a colorful outfit. The scene was surreal. "Diego, what the hell is this circus?" he blurted. "Alejandro, calm down," Diego pleaded. "This is Vera, the patient. And this is Sarah, a friend. She needs urgent care. Can we spend the night here?" Alejandro's jaw dropped at the situation scale, but seeing how weak Vera looked, he sighed. "Fine. Come in. Just keep it down, my neighbors have a baby." The three of them entered the spacious living room. Vera sank onto the couch, breathing heavily. Alejandro looked from her to Diego. "Explain what's going on." Diego briefly explained that he had discovered an abscess and that drainage was needed. Alejandro nodded slowly, trying to grasp the strangeness of the whole situation. "I'm afraid she might spike a fever during the night," Diego added. "She needs rest and care." "All right," Alejandro nodded. "I have a second bedroom. Let her stay there for the night. Sarah can sleep on the couch in the living room. And you, Diego, you've got your room. Everyone happy now?" They quietly went to their respective places. Diego examined Vera one more time. He gave her a painkiller from his emergency kit and instructed her to stay in bed. "Thank you," she whispered as he was about to leave the bedroom. "I know this is all crazy, but I—" "Don't say anything," Diego interrupted her gently. "Just rest. We'll figure things out tomorrow." In the hallway, Diego bumped into Sarah, who was carrying a glass of water for herself. She looked at him and asked, "Is everything okay?" "For now, yes. But I'm really worried. If the abscess bursts." Sarah's face showed fear. "We won't let that happen, right?" Diego sighed. "I hope not. Tomorrow we'll know more." They said good night. Sarah lay down on the couch, and Diego went to his room, barely making it to the bed. His mind was spinning. What am I doing? This feels like madness. But maybe it'll save her, and my reputation. A couple of hours later, Diego woke to a knock at the door. Outside stood Vera the pale, her face filled with worry. I don't feel well, she whispered, clutching her abdomen. In the dim light of the night lamp, Diego saw she was sweating heavily, drops of perspiration glistening on her forehead. He quickly got up, gave her a fever reducer, and checked her pulse. It was too fast. Her temperature, over 40 degrees Celsius. Damn it, he swore. We need to get you to a clinic, now, or... I don't want to go to a hospital, she protested, but it was clear she was scared and barely able to stand. Diego responded firmly. We don't have a choice. If we don't drain the abscess immediately, the consequences could be catastrophic. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to endure the pain. Alejandro, having heard the noise, ran into the hallway, still half asleep and clutching his phone. Sarah appeared too, looking frightened. What do we do? Alejandro asked. We need to find an operating room right now, Diego said. Or we risk losing her. He remembered a small private clinic where his friend, Surgeon David Barreda, worked. They occasionally accepted emergency cases without red tape or questions. Maybe David would have the guts to admit them and do what was necessary. Call Barreda, he told Alejandro. Tell him it's critical. We need an or right away. While Alejandro dialed the number, Diego helped Vera get dressed as best he could. She was nearly unconscious from pain and fever. Sarah brought a cold compress and placed it on her forehead. Hang in there, Vera, Diego said, trying to keep his voice steady. It's going to be okay. You're going to make it. Don't leave me, she moaned, half delirious. I won't. A couple of minutes later, Alejandro returned. David says the oar is ready. No questions asked. Just come, and she goes straight in. Perfect, Diego exhaled. Help me get her into the car. They went downstairs. A neighbor peeked out into the hallway but said nothing upon seeing the emergency. They placed Vera on the back seat. Diego sat beside her, holding her so she wouldn't collapse. Alejandro got behind the wheel, and Sarah sat up front. Step on it, Alejandro, Diego said, glancing between the road and Vera, who was softly moaning. The car sped off. Thus began the race to save Vera's life and possibly Diego's reputation. The night was dark, the streets empty. Alejandro was driving well over the limit but carefully enough to avoid speed cameras. Diego checked Vera's pulse occasionally. It kept climbing. Let's just hope it's not sepsis, he murmured, knowing every minute was precious. 20 minutes later, they rushed into the courtyard of Barreda's private clinic. David was already waiting by the entrance in surgical gear. 2 night shift nurses stood beside him, seasoned and efficient. They quickly rolled over a stretcher. What's the case? Barreda asked shortly, taking Vera from Diego's arms. Post-op complications. Likely an abdominal abscess. High fever. Needs immediate drainage and sanitation, Diego reported. Got it. Let's get her on the table. Diego, you assisting? Of course, Diego nodded, removing his jacket to reveal his shirt underneath. Sarah and Alejandro stayed behind in the reception area. Diego and David wheeled Vera into the operating room. Inside was the familiar world of surgery, bright lights, the metallic gleam of instruments, the sharp scent of antiseptic. Get a vein. Prep anesthesia, Barreda instructed a nurse. Local or general, the nurse asked. General, Diego replied. She's in critical condition. We need full access. As the anesthesiologist inserted the breathing tube, Vera was already barely conscious, grimacing only slightly. Diego, now in a sterile gown, prepared the drainage kit and disinfected the abdominal area. David stood beside him, supervising. Show me on the ultrasound where the abscess is, David said. Diego pointed, based on the earlier scan. They made a small incision, carefully reaching the abscess cavity. Yellowish fluid began to ooze from the wound. Diego immediately recognized the familiar sharp odor. They used the aspirator to suction the pus. Careful, Barreda reminded. Don't damage surrounding structures. Diego worked like a machine, focused and precise. His head throbbed with tension, but his hands remained steady. A life depended on this, no room for error. Once most of the pus was removed, he gently inserted a drainage tube and secured it. Needs irrigation, said David, handing over antiseptic solution. Diego rinsed the cavity, confirming the fluid drained well. Finally, the procedure was complete. Vera lay under anesthesia, the four dripping steadily. Now we just need to avoid complications, Barreda said, removing his gloves. For antibiotics, full monitoring. I'm staying with her, Diego said. I'm not officially allowed to work here, but I have to stay. Understood. Stay quiet and keep a low profile. I told the staff this is a VIP case and you're the lead consultant. No one will ask questions. Thanks, David, Diego said sincerely. Don't mention it. Let's hope everything goes smoothly. They moved Vera to the ICU room. Diego sat beside her, holding her hand. She was pale, but her breathing had stabilized and her temperature had started to drop. Behind the glass, Alejandro and Sarah appeared, looking in to ask silently if they could come in. Diego nodded, indicating things were under control. A few minutes later, they entered quietly, gazing at Vera's exhausted face. Is she going to make it? Sarah asked anxiously. I think so, Diego nodded. As long as the infection hasn't spread. Alejandro let out a breath of relief and looked at Diego with pride. You're amazing. A real hero. I'm just doing my job, Diego replied humbly. They decided to stay at the clinic until morning to monitor Vera's condition. Sarah curled up in a small chair in the hallway. Alejandro stepped out occasionally, likely to speak with clients. Diego checked Vera's vitals, blood pressure, pulse, temperature, every 30 minutes. She slept under anesthesia, the 4 drips slowly delivering fluids and antibiotics into her vein. By morning, her condition had stabilized, the fever had subsided, and her pulse had returned to normal. Diego was finally able to breathe a little, step outside to get some fresh air, and call his contact at the lab to ask whether the blood test was ready. The man informed him the results were bad, there was strong inflammation, but now that the abscess had been drained, things should start improving. You're a real surgeon, Diego, said Sarah, who had followed him outside and shared a cup of coffee. I saw how desperate you were yesterday, standing outside the hospital after getting fired. Diego gave a crooked smile. Life is unpredictable. Yesterday I was unemployed and cursed by everyone. And today I saved someone's life, like I used to. Maybe this is my chance to reclaim my name. You will, she said confidently. And I'll help you. He nodded gratefully. The entire experience had brought them closer together, despite how different their worlds were. When Vera woke up closer to noon, Diego was already at her side. She opened her eyes, struggling to focus. Is it over? She asked in a weak voice. The main part is. We drained the abscess. Now you're on antibiotics. You'll need a couple of days of rest. She blinked, beginning to understand what had happened. Her expression softened. Thank you, Diego, I don't know what to say. He covered her hand with his own. No need to say anything. Just rest. I'm not going anywhere until you're stable. At that moment, Alejandro entered the room. He brought some food and water, nodded at Vera in greeting. Glad to see you're on the mend. Thank you, she whispered. Are you Diego's lawyer? Something like that, Alejandro replied with a smile. But right now, I'm more your logistics coordinator. I see, Vera murmured, then turned to Diego. What happens now? He shrugged, a bit unsure. I don't know yet. We'll try to figure out how to fix what happened with your false statement at the hospital. Maybe you could take another look at those papers you signed? Vera frowned. Of course. I don't want you to suffer because of me, but it's all very complicated. Someone told me about maintaining the hospital's image, its reputation. I didn't really look into it. It's okay. We'll figure it out, Diego reassured her. Also, she added quietly, I paid a lot of money for that surgery, but I don't know where exactly it went. Is it possible there are documents that say it was your personal responsibility? It's possible, Diego admitted. Alejandro immediately perked up. That's exactly where we need to dig. I can help with that. If the hospital illegally put all the costs and blame on Diego, we need to challenge it. We could request copies of the payment documents from the clinic, Diego said, but I doubt they'll just give them to us. I've got a couple of contacts in the tax office, Alejandro said with a sly smile, glancing at Vera. With an audit, we could find out how the clinic recorded your payments. Do it, Vera said wearily but firmly. I understand now, if it all turned against Diego, it might be part of a financial scheme. Diego felt that they were finally forming a plan. Though a lot of work lay ahead, the whole firing scandal might just be the tip of the iceberg. Get some rest, he repeated, gently stroking her hand. Vera closed her eyes. Diego and Alejandro stepped out into the hallway to discuss next steps. Sarah was sitting on a bench, nodding off. She clearly hadn't slept all night. Diego gently tapped her shoulder to wake her. How is she? Sarah asked, waking up. Stable, Diego nodded. Thank you for sticking with us. She smiled and yawned. Alejandro suggested she go rest in the staff lounge where there was a couch. She agreed. Diego and Alejandro walked into a small, rarely used office to speak privately. After closing the door, the lawyer got straight to the point. So what's your plan? I need to dig into the documents. Figure out who set me up. But where to start? Most likely with Chief Medical Officer Arturo Corona or someone on the board, but we'll need to be careful. They could destroy the evidence. Diego clenched his jaw, remembering how Corona had said gently, It's not my decision. Maybe he really wasn't the instigator. There was an entire board of directors, investors. I think, Diego said, staring out the window, that this was intentional. Maybe by competitors. I was rising quickly, and I had developed innovative surgical techniques that could have brought profit to the clinic. Maybe they wanted to get rid of me and claim my work as their own. Alejandro nodded. That's likely, but you'll need evidence. I'll bring in some lawyers to file official requests. If the clinic lied about your condition the night of the surgery and forged Valenzuela's signature, that's a serious offense. Good, Diego agreed. But Vera needs to confirm they misled her. She seems willing to cooperate. You saved her life. I hope so, Diego said thoughtfully. We also need to find out who was the administrator on duty that night, who logged my arrival. There should be surveillance footage, visitor logs. I'll file an official legal request, Alejandro offered. We'll see what they say. Then we'll plan the next step. Diego nodded with approval, finally feeling like they were making progress. A few days passed. Vera recovered under the care of Diego and David Barreda. Her test results improved. She could now sit up and eat light food. Alejandro managed to obtain preliminary information from the tax office. Part of Vera's payments had gone through offshore accounts, and there were suspicions the money hadn't just paid for the operation, but also for consulting services that listed Diego's name. It looked like the clinic was framing him and planning to make him repay the money for a botched surgery. When Vera heard that, she was furious. What kind of fraud is this? I gave that money to an official account, and it ended up offshore? Apparently, Alejandro said dryly. We'll need detailed statements. That's vile, Vera hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. I promise you, Diego, I'll personally see to this. I have connections in the business world. I can make an impact. Diego simply nodded, seeing how powerful she became when wronged. She was now fully on his side. On the third day of Vera's stay, they decided it was time for discharge under outpatient observation. She felt better, and staying under false names was becoming risky. David Barreda said his goodbyes and asked them not to bring further attention to his clinic. "Of course," said Diego. "Thank you, David. I owe you. You'll owe me dinner at a nice restaurant once this mess is over," Barreda smiled. Vera, Diego, Sarah, and Alejandro left in Alejandro's car, thinking about where Vera could stay next. Returning to her mansion didn't seem like a good idea. It might still be compromised. Alejandro suggested booking her a room in a small countryside hotel where there'd be no unwanted eyes. "I'll take the most basic room," Vera said suddenly. "I'm tired of luxury." No one objected. So that's what they did, registering under a different name to avoid drawing journalists' attention. In the small hotel room, Vera finally exhaled and felt safe. Diego stayed with her for a few more days to monitor her condition. Sarah and Alejandro left to tend to their own business. The quiet in the room felt unfamiliar. Vera sat by the window, gazing at the forest outside. Diego poured her a cup of herbal tea and handed it to her. She smiled. "Thank you. I never imagined I'd be in a situation like this, thanking a former surgeon whom I unknowingly set up." "You're not to blame," he gently replied. "They gave you those papers to sign while you were in a bad state." "I know, but I still feel responsible." She took a sip of tea and fell silent in thought. Diego watched her calm profile, seeing not a rich woman, but a woman exhausted from fighting. "Why did you become a surgeon?" she suddenly asked in a quiet, simple voice. Diego smiled faintly. "I dreamed of saving lives since childhood. My father was a doctor, my mother a paramedic. It seemed like my path. Then my father left, and I held a grudge, but still went into medicine. I guess I wanted to prove I could be better than him." Vera nodded. "I grew up in a family of business people. We were raised with no space for weakness, always taught to win. So failure feels like a disaster to me. But now I realize illness isn't a business deal. You can't just outmaneuver it." They sat close, sharing their stories, feeling the ice melt between them. Outside, it had started to drizzle, but the room felt warm and calm. "When I'm finally discharged, we'll go to your clinic together, and I'll deal with those scoundrels," Vera said with surprising confidence. "I want everyone to know Diego is not at fault." "Thank you," he whispered, a lump rising in his throat. He had endured so much in the past few days, and now he finally saw a light at the end of the tunnel. The next day, Vera contacted some acquaintances in the business world with stakes in the clinic, as well as board members. It turned out that the main instigator behind Diego's dismissal was an investor named Sebastián González. He had been pushing his own interests, supplying equipment and medication to the clinic in exchange for hefty kickbacks. Rumor had it he wanted to install his own surgeon in Diego's place to continue his schemes undetected. Upon learning this, Vera realized that her surgery had been used as an excuse to frame Diego as an incompetent doctor. Gonzalez had allegedly offered the clinic's leadership a profitable plan for personnel replacement, and they had agreed, using documents signed under Vera's name. "He was always shady," Vera said, grimacing as she told Diego. "But I never thought he'd stoop so low, destroying a good surgeon's reputation." "I hope everything becomes clear now," said Diego. "But it has to be formalized legally, so the clinic acknowledges their mistake." Vera was resolute. "I'll do everything I can. I need to meet with the board myself." They agreed. Alejandro helped organize the meeting, prepared documents proving Vera had never officially declared Diego negligent, and requested additional accounting records from the clinic. The day of reckoning arrived. In the same conference room where Diego had been dismissed, the board gathered, including Arturo Corona, who visibly tensed when he saw Diego and Vera enter, with Alejandro and Sarah behind them. Sarah insisted on attending. She had started this mission with her prophetic whisper, "Go back to the rich woman. Examine her." A hush fell over the room as Vera began to speak. "Gentlemen, I want to clarify matters concerning the surgery performed by Dr. Serrano. My internal audit revealed that I never signed any official statement accusing him of negligence. On the contrary, I confirmed that Dr. Serrano saved my life, and there were no issues with his professionalism. She looked around at the clinic executives, who sat in silence, aware that crossing someone as influential as Valenzuela was dangerous. Then she gestured to the papers in front of her. Here I see false data included in your report, supposedly with my signature. That constitutes forgery. Moreover, the funds I paid for the operation were partially funneled through offshore accounts, and Dr. Serrano's name appeared in the records, though he never received the money. This points to a fraudulent scheme. But someone began to object, but Vera raised her hand. I've already spoken with some of you and know that Mr. Gonzalez was behind it. Where is he? Silence. Sebastian Gonzalez hadn't shown up. Corona muttered. He left town in a hurry yesterday. Perfect, Vera said coldly. Running won't spare him from accountability. She turned to Corona. Arturo, you know Diego is a talented surgeon. Why did you allow his dismissal? The head physician sighed and looked down. I was forced. They said if I didn't comply, I'd lose my job and the clinic's funding would be cut off. Gonzalez pressured me. That was cowardly, Vera said accusingly. You let them throw out a man who saves lives. Corona shrank, realizing everything had come to light. Finally, he mumbled. Diego, I didn't want this. But Diego didn't look at him. He was elsewhere, feeling bitterness and relief. All he wanted now was for the truth to be restored. Vera declared. Here, in the presence of the board, I state that Dr. Serrano's dismissal was unlawful. I demand his immediate reinstatement and a public retraction of the false accusations. Otherwise, I will withdraw all my investments from your medical center and file a lawsuit for document fraud. A murmur swept through the room. Most understood that losing a major investor like Valenzuela would be disastrous. A public scandal wouldn't help either. One of the senior directors bowed his head. We agree. Dr. Serrano may return to his position, and we will issue a formal apology. Diego felt dizzy from the wave of emotion. So much had happened in recent days. Despite the lingering hurt and betrayal, he knew his place was in the operating room. And now, he had the chance to return. Thank you, he said softly, masking his emotion behind a calm demeanor. I don't need praise. I need the chance to do my job. They reached an agreement. Diego was reinstated, a public statement was prepared for the media, and a collective lawsuit was planned against Gonzalez. Corona personally shook Diego's hand, trying to smooth things over. When the meeting ended, Diego and Vera stepped into the hallway where Alejandro and Sarah were waiting. Sarah's eyes sparkled with joy. Doctor, are you a doctor again? Yes, Diego smiled. Thanks to you too, Sarah. You told me to go back to the rich woman, and you were right. Sarah blushed. It just felt like fate at that moment. Alejandro patted Diego on the shoulder. I'm glad your reputation is restored. I hope you can work calmly now, without fear of sabotage. I'll be more careful, Diego nodded, realizing he had shed his youthful naivety. Vera looked at him with gratitude. Her treatment and recovery weren't over, but she felt much better, physically and emotionally. Let me give you a ride, Vera offered. I have an idea. Diego didn't decline. They walked to Vera's car, leaving Alejandro and Sarah to discuss their own matters. As they drove off, Vera asked quietly, Now that you're officially back at the clinic, will you take me on as a patient? If you wish, he replied. I want to continue treatment. Maybe find some inner peace. I've realized that money and status mean nothing when it comes to health. He glanced at her, seeing how sincerely she tried to speak. For the first time, they weren't just surgeon and patient, but two people who had been through something profound together. We'll find balance, Diego promised. The important thing is, I can help people again. And I'm glad we unraveled this dark story. Vera nodded with a tired but gentle smile. The car rolled away from the clinic where their fate had recently been decided. Ahead lay a new day and new possibilities. Diego, watching the road, thought about how life can drag you to the bottom just to give you the strength to rise again. He recalled Sarah's words, "Go back to the rich woman. Examine her." They had sounded mystical, but in the end, everything had a logical explanation. Malice, financial fraud, investor pressure, there was no magic in this story, only human cruelty and greed, but also human nobility, faith in justice, and the willingness to help. Diego would long remember the moment when, desperate after being fired, he threw money at the young fortune teller, and instead of cheating or running away, she gave him a key to salvation, in the form of a cryptic piece of advice. Now, he felt like life was beginning again, on a clean page, where he wasn't just a surgeon, but a man who had endured pain and loneliness and was ready for new relationships, a meaningful career, and true friendship. In the end, the most important thing was, he hadn't betrayed his calling and continued to save lives. And that realization brought him such relief and joy that he couldn't help but smile. "Who would have thought we'd end this story like this?" Vera said softly, turning to him. "Yes," he replied with a smile, "but the important thing is, it ended well." And at that moment, he thought he saw not only relief in her eyes, but a new spark of hope. Outside the window, the sun finally broke through the clouds, as if celebrating their victory too.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.